And I think tonight we are going to talk about subplots.
All right.
It's a very exciting topic. Everyone's jumping in to say something first. So I will start us off with the statement that if you are writing a novella or longer, you must have subplots. In a short story, you can have a single plot line in your story arc, but once you get longer, more characters, more complex, you really need the subplot. It will put flesh on your bones and save your story from lots of problems like the soggy middle.
Mm-hmm.
So, reactions?
This is something I've been struggling with right now, actually, as I've been writing, is trying to craft subplots that are actually complementary or provide tension with the main plot and enrich my character and give my character what she needs to continue in the main plot line. So I want my subplots to have meaning to the story, not just to be time takers or time wasters where people are like, well, what does this have anything to do with anything? It should bring her along her path in what she needs to do in terms of the main plot, but with a different, plot line or different arc entirely. So I've been struggling with creating something that has that tension, that can provide conflict in a different area than the main plot is providing conflict. So
good. I'm glad you said that. That's perfect. And I think we can talk about how to go about making the subplot relevant to the plot. But first, Matt, do you want to say anything?
I'm just curious if, in Kathryn's experience, she is having trouble with, or is thinking about the subplots in terms of like internal conflict and external conflict. So like the main plot would be the external, and the subplots would like deepen the internal conflict with your character. Is that how you're approaching it?
Right now, yeah, I'm looking at, how are they developing her as a person, as a character, in her characteristics and her personality that will then prepare her to do the things that she has to do in the main plot line, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
so
totally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think, Alida? Is it different, like if you're writing a character-based story or a plot-based story? And I know sometimes that's considered like a false dichotomy, but I'm just wondering if, if you just have like a real plot-heavy explosion, maybe it's an action or a plot-heavy story, maybe it's an action story with lots of explosions. Do you then make the subplots deepen the characters emotionally, and vice versa?
Yes. There's the short answer.
Single word answer to the question.
Yeah. Well, we should definitely talk a little more about what a subplot is, and I will do that. But I think it's what you were saying just now, Matt, brought something to mind. I'm going to grab a book here. So I'm teaching a workshop on writing monsters, how to create a fictional monster. And so this week I've been thinking about that, pulling together lots of source material for the workshop. And Jaws is one of the texts that I'm excerpting for this class. And in the introduction, Peter Benchley says that when the movie was being made, it was optioned for a movie before or right about when it was first published, and he got the deal to co-write the screenplay or to write the first two drafts or something. And he was told, take out the romance, take out the mafia stuff. This is a straight action movie. It's a thriller, start to finish, one through line. And then Peter Benchley goes on to say in the introduction, if you've only seen the movie and you don't know what I'm talking about with romance and mafia, read on. And
right.
So, you've got the movie Jaws where it is a straight through line. Shark attacks people, people hunt shark, right? People win. The book, literature, more complex, has some subplots dealing with romance and the mafia. So even in something you would consider a thriller or plot driven, unless you want cardboard cutout characters, they probably have a life outside of the main plot line. And that might involve romance. It might involve the mafia. Who knows, right? But you definitely need to have a fulfilling character arc to go along with your exciting plot arc. So one of the ways I define subplot and differentiate it from the main plot is that your main plot is where the character solves the problem that you set up at the beginning of the book. That's the main crisis, conflict, good guy versus bad guy, whatever it is. The subplots are where your character gets to be a human being with relationships, with emotional resonance, with contradictions and complications. So all of those subplot elements come to bear on the main plot. So if your main plot is sheriff goes hunting great white shark, well, if he's got a wife at home who's afraid he's going to be eaten by the shark, now he's got an emotional tug conflicting with his career duty. There, your romantic subplot can affect your thriller main plot. It complicates it. It also makes him more human.
Yeah, that's interesting. You use the book to film comparison. So I recently watched 11/22/63, which is the Hulu TV adaptation of Stephen King's novel. It's about a character traveling back in time to stop JFK's assassination. And I watched the series first, the TV series first. And when I was reading the book, I was surprised to find a couple chapters with a subplot that were just totally cut out. Not even mentioned in the film adaptation, because there's just not enough room for it in that medium. They have to move faster, and they have to compress this 1,000-page book into 8 episodes. So there's just not enough room for subplots, really.
Right. No, that's very true. In fact, short stories and novellas are better for movies than novels. Too much of the novel has to be cut out.
Right. It's an interesting problem.
So I know Stephen King's Stand By Me, that was a short story made into a movie. Brokeback Mountain, I believe that was Annie Proulx. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that was, I think, a short story, maybe a novella, but definitely shorter literature is better for the movies.
Yeah.
So, Kathryn, you're working on this issue right now. So do you want to maybe give us an example of one of your subplots and how it is affecting your main plot?
Sure. So I actually wrote a little bit about this today in my journal, just because I was thinking about, how my character has to get to this point where starts as a dependent. She's very dependent on the people around her, and she wants them to support her. And the main plot calls for her to make a decision and a stand on her own and on her own opinion. So one of the subplots is actually a conflict with basically a mentor figure who isn't being the mentor figure she wants her to be. So it's the conflict between my main character and a priestess in the temple who they just don't see eye to eye. Tara's completely running all over the place in a direction that this character, the priestess, doesn't want her to. So I need to be able to amp up that conflict and get her to a point where she doesn't feel safe, bringing the main plot line conflict to this person who should be her mentor. So it's like that conflict and tension and subplot that needs to contribute to her stepping out on her own, but also needs to be believable and needs to have some backstory and some motivation and some reasons why they would ever come to that conflict to begin with. So that's kind of where I'm struggling right now, is making sure that it doesn't just feel like a device, but that it's actually a real person having real conflict with another real person, which then drives both the subplot and the main plot forward.
Right, definitely. And I think you hit on a key word there when you said a real person in conflict with a real person. So it's not enough just to have backstory or a quick bit of summary to set up the subplot. You need to actually show it in scene. So early in the book, you might have a scene where the student and the mentor clash over a philosophical disagreement or something, and
Right.
maybe the mentor is overly harsh. Maybe the student feels chastised or publicly embarrassed or something. So then later on, when the student is confronted with bringing the problem to the mentor, the reader's already thinking, ooh, I wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
Right? So
Exactly.
you plant those seeds in scene by showing that relationship as it unfolds.
And it's kind of fun because you can like hint, you don't have to have full scenes that develop this. Like you can just hint at it in places and things can happen, and like you just weave it in through the chapters and the scenes. It's been an interesting exercise in trying to figure out where it goes and how to work it in without being too heavy-handed or anything like that. But yeah, so I've been trying to kind of read some other fantasy books and trying to figure out, oh, look at this, look at how they did this, and this like 2 paragraphs worth of information that just makes it so much richer. So just that idea of weaving it in,
right,
is fun.
Totally. We've been talking about how the subplots enhance the main character's development, right? But it's also a great opportunity to develop your secondary characters too, make them more interesting through the subplots. So it goes both ways, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I've really been saying that the subplot enhances and complicates the main plot. And you bring up a fantastic point, Matt, that subplots aren't just for the main character. They're for all of your important characters. And this is where your main character gets to interact with other characters. And those things that seem trivial now can be very important later. But you're planting those seeds early on. So I'll use the murder in Skog Hall as an example. I've got my main character, Jess, starts dating a guy, Tyler, who's a veteran with PTSD. I don't say that because Jess doesn't know that yet, but you see him kind of twitchy, acting maybe a little claustrophobic. You see him, he's got, you don't know what it is. There's a shape in his hip pocket, but it's a knife with the blade folded in. It's a pocket knife, and his hand keeps going to that and kind of like a security thing, like, okay, you know, I'm packing, I'll be okay kind of a thing. So these are mannerisms that seem very trivial, but then as we learn more about his character and he actually becomes a danger to Jess, those are the breadcrumbs that leave the trail that, you know, turns into this much bigger, more relevant thing. And of course, the ghost haunting Jess was murdered by a Vietnam veteran with PTSD. So Jess's subplot, romance with Tyler, is very much a complicating factor in the main plot, finding out who killed her ghost. Right.
Did you architect that ahead of time, or is that something that you went back and planted like during drafting, or maybe after the first draft was done?
Planted what part? The fact that they're both veterans?
Yeah, the fact that Tyler had PTSD and he had the pocket knife in his pocket, and he was, you know, had these mannerisms that lent itself to that. I find that a lot of people, they don't realize while they're drafting that they need a subplot, and then when they realize that, oh, this is the one I need, they go back and they plant those details. But, you know, everybody's different, right? Somebody who's a thorough plotter would know that ahead of time. Right.
No, I knew that ahead of time as I was writing. I don't know that it was like in my outline, Tyler will, you know, keep a knife in his pocket. But as I'm writing and I'm looking for that mannerism or that tell, like one of his mannerisms is to run his fingers through his hair, and he's got a scar from his war wound that just shows when he pushes his hair back. You know, so as you start thinking about who is this character, how does he evolve on the page, and what can I show the reader? Because I'm not going to say, meet Tyler. Tyler's a veteran. Tyler has PTSD, right? It's got to be an unfolding for it to be fun. If you tell it all, you spoil the experience.
It's not a Clifford
of reading
the Big Red Dog story.
Right, yeah. See Spot. C-spot, run. Yeah, no, it isn't. But those things really came out of research. So before I started writing, I kept a journal, and I was reading up on mediums and ghosts and PTSD, and I'm not sure where all the different things came from. I suppose mostly my imagination, but Until Tuesday is a memoir by Luis Carlos Montalvan, and he's a veteran with PTSD, and it's a story about him and his service dog. And at one point he makes reference to how before he got his dog, he had such anxiety, he carried on him the largest knife you're allowed to legally carry in the city of New York. And I don't know how many inches that is, I don't remember, but that gave me the idea for, okay, I can see how if you have PTSD, you might feel like you need a weapon on your body. Right. So research is a great resource for these elements.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So other thoughts or examples on subplots?
So I had one in my novel, The Auriga Project. I had kind of that soggy middle problem that you mentioned earlier, where it just kind of stretched for a while and some time had to pass and not enough was happening. So the main character, Eamon, is helped through the transporter at the end by his friend Gustav. And the whole time I realized that Gustav was kind of in one state. He was just like helping through the whole book. And so to make the middle more interesting, and also to, have this subplot work into Gustav helping Eamon, I gave Gustav a significant other that was sick that he had to take care of, and then that gave me a way to allow Eamon and Gustav to have a falling out, so that when Gustav came back and helped Eamon in the end, it had more impact. So that really helped the story a lot.
Definitely. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the soggy middle again, because a lot of plots thin out in the middle. Those main plots, you've got this great opening hook and this big dramatic climax, but in the middle your main character has to do a lot of legwork. There's research, there's travel, you're hoofing it around a mountain range or the city or whatever, and things can get kind of dull. And this information is important, the character must do this to get to the climax, the reader really needs to understand it, but it's just not exciting. It's not good fiction. And this is where your subplots can really save your story. They allow you those side conflicts, those emotional issues. You can bring in extra characters to do some of the heavy lifting of keeping the tension and the stakes rising. And Matt, what you did in the Auriga Project is a great example of that, where Eamon, it wasn't time for him to be in conflict with the bad guy in the climax, but we needed some kind of conflict, so you have a rift between allies. It's a perfect, classic way to keep the story moving when you're in that middle section where, the main plot's kind of thin.
And unlike Alida, I didn't plan this ahead of time. I had to go back and fix it. I didn't notice it was a problem until, it was a problem. It's one of those things that if you're not experienced planning stories, you don't realize that you need to do that, right? And so you're like, oh, I think I have the whole story. The main plot is there, and it still falls out, right?
Right, absolutely. And, we don't want to be defined by our jobs. We have lots of interests, lots of different relationships, lots of different roles that we play in this world. Your main character doesn't want to be defined by her main plot. Give her a life, right? And let those things influence and factor in and complicate each other. And you'll have much richer stories and more relatable characters when you develop your subplots.
Yeah, and it's a great way to insert your own interests too. Like if you have like a passion for archaeology or for rare books or for whatever, you can give that to your character and kind of use it to fill out the subplots. So you get interested writing it, and it's interesting to the reader because it's different than like whatever your main storyline is.
Yeah, that's very true. I did that in the Skog Hall books, in fact, because I've trained a service dog for Helping Paws, and Helping Paws trains dogs for veterans with PTSD as well as people with physical disabilities. So at the very end of The Murder in Skog Hall, Tyler reappears with the service dog. And his dog Bruno gets to be a bigger character in the second book, in Dark Corners. And it was a lot of fun. It was a blast to write the dogs, and people like dogs, so you know.
Win-win.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. Cool. All right, any last thoughts? No.
Nothing. I got nothing.
I guess we said it all.
Subplots are good.
That's great.
Yes, okay. So 3 votes in favor of subplots. You need them. Use them. Love your supporting characters. Get them involved with your main character. It's all good.